If you're a fan of the show Dateline, you may recognize our next guest. He's appeared so many times on the show that the crew started calling him the Evidence Whisperer. His quest for clues led him to study the biggest cold case in history, the case of the divine intruder.
Jim Warner Wallace is a seasoned cold case homicide detective who comes from 3 generations of law enforcement. He's also been featured repeatedly on NBC's Dateline. For many years, Jim was an atheist. But in 1996, he began to search for proof of God's existence, the same way he would search for clues at a crime scene. His investigation led him to an unwavering conclusion. Jim shares his forensic evidence in his book, God's Crime Scene, to make a compelling case in favor of a divine creator.
Well, please welcome to the show cold case detective Jim Warner, J. Warner Wallace, and it's great to have you here.
Hey, thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
You have a fascinating history here. Here you are, an atheist, an investigator. You're 35 years old, and suddenly you decide to have faith. How did that happen?
Boy, it took some time. I mean, for me, a lot of this was kind of parsing through the evidence over a period of time. People always ask me, well, what was the big event for you? It really wasn't a big event. I just assembled this case that was more and more compelling. And I got to the point where I was really convinced of the reliability of the Gospels short of the miracle accounts. I would have said this is kind of some kind of historical fiction. The miracles have got to be fiction. But the next step for me was simply to ask myself, well, do I really believe that that my naturalistic worldview as an atheist, where I only believe that natural law and physics and chemistry could explain the world the way it really is, the universe the way it really is? Because that was my problem. I rejected anything supernatural.
Right. Anything that was had a hint of miraculous,
yes.
You just said that's irrational.
That's right.
But what got you started to say that the scriptures are actually authentic documents?
I was kind of parsing through them really for the express purpose of discovering whether or not I could trust what they said about Jesus. And as I did this, I kind of assessed them with the same template I use, which is really from the California State jury instructions, about reliability of witnesses. What are we looking for? We're looking for really 4 basic things, and I found those 4 basic things in the Gospel, so then I was just stuck with the miracles. What do I do with the miracles? How do I explain these? And that's when the next step for me was to examine the evidence in the universe and ask myself the question, could my philosophical naturalism, rejecting anything supernatural, could it really explain the universe the way it is? And it turns out that it really was deficient in explaining the universe. Now, if you accept that there's a being out there that could create everything, all space, time, and matter that's governed by the laws of physics from nothing, well, then it seems to me that being could probably manage to walk on water and part the Red Sea and do a lot of other things.
He can raise the dead,
yes,
too.
that seem like minor miracles compared to Genesis 1. Now, we already believe that Genesis 1 is true, but do we have any good scientific, philosophical reason to believe that even if I had no scripture, could I get to the same conclusion? And for me as an atheist, that was the way you had to get me. Because you couldn't offer your holy book as a way of proving your holy book. I needed to come at it some other way. And that was just the wall that I had constructed for myself.
A lot of atheists say, though, that the evidence in creation, in the universe around us, for God is hidden. And in fact, Richard Dawkins has come out and said, what happens if you die and it turns out you're wrong? What are you going to do? And he's going to say, well, I'm going to go to God and said, you did a really good job of hiding. So how do you deal with that one?
Oh gosh, I tell you, I had an entire career of finding the stuff that's hiding in plain sight. Because typically my cases get closed or get left open and kind of walked away from back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s because some detectives said, there's not enough here. I get to open it up again and kind of examine it carefully to see, is there something that maybe his presuppositions prevented him from seeing? And so the reason why it's hidden for folks like Dawkins is that they have a huge presupposition that blinds them to what's obvious. So we are looking at the exact same pieces of evidence. I look at the same evidence that my atheist friends look at, the same science, the same philosophy, the same data. The difference is that I'm interpreting it now through a lens that's broader than theirs. They've already cut off an entire way of seeing it. I'm open to that way of seeing it. So what I want to do is provide a resource where people could actually look at the same pieces of evidence, but hear it from a different filter, hear it from a different explanation.
So what was the evidence for you as the jury to say, I need to change my thought here? I can't be an atheist anymore.
Well, I looked at the 8 pieces of evidence I've described in this book and really looked at it and said, okay, there are 4 very different, completely unrelated categories. The origin of the universe, the fine-tuning of the universe, the origin of life in the universe, the appearance of design and biology, your consciousness, free agency, objective moral truths, and evil. These are 8 things that everyone has an equal burden to explain given their worldview. The problem I had as I looked at those 8 things is that my atheistic worldview could not account for any of those things. Over and over again, I could not explain the evidence in the room of the universe by staying in the room of the universe. Everything points to something that's extra-natural, supranatural, or supernatural.
Let's just take the problem of evil. Because within the atheist worldview, the evidence of evil for them says there cannot be a loving God. Why would he allow that to happen in his universe?
Well, in the book, I try to go through an explanatory filter. You know, we have explanatory filters for every case we work. An act of evil, when a parent says, why did this happen to my little girl? Well, it's complex. I've got to give you, there's a set of circumstances that came together in a certain way, a puzzle that came together that allowed that to happen. Are there similar conditions that might have explanatory value? Why God might allow it? But more importantly, when someone says, I think X is evil, what do they really mean by that? They really mean more than their personal opinion. They think it's transcendently evil, but how could anything be transcendently evil unless there is a transcendent standard of good that we're using to measure, to judge that this is... Now, if it's just a matter of personal opinion, you can eliminate all evil by simply changing your opinion. Right. But if you can't eliminate evil that way, it's because we recognize it's something that transcends all of us, but then what is the standard we're using to measure such a thing? The problem is that in order for there to be true transcendent evil, there has to be a true transcendent standard of good. What could that be? Well, of course, that's why I don't think that evil is an exculpating piece of evidence. It's an inculpating piece of evidence. It points to the same conclusion as all the other pieces. You can't really even have this thing you perceive as true evil unless there's a true God that is the standard for all justice, the standard for all righteousness, by which it's he's, as C.S. Lewis says, the straight line that defines the crooked line.
Yeah, it's the index.
That's right, the index we're measuring
it gives us an index.
Yeah.
For me, I think one of the biggest evidence is the fact that we have consciousness.
Oh, the best argument for God is the fact we can make an argument. You and I can make an argument.
The thing we're most intimate with, and at the same time, the most inexplicable.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's lots of atheists who said the exact same thing. How does immaterial consciousness emerge from an evolutionary process involving the lumpy gray matter we call the brain? That's a physical process. If atheism is true, we live in a physical universe made of nothing more than matter. All we are molecules in motion. Anything immaterial, like consciousness, or even, because if this is true, if atheism is true, the universe we live in is not only material, it's determined by prior material causes. And you actually think you made a free choice? Well, how could you make a free choice with your immaterial mind if the material universe is all that exists and we just are members of that material universe? So there's a problem, they call it the problem of mind. It's not a problem for you or I, because we obviously have an explanation for this. If there's a conscious mind that transcends the universe, that has the freedom to create creatively in its own image, well, that might explain why we have similar properties. But if atheism is true, then all we are molecules in motion through a long evolutionary process that was determined from the beginning of the universe, and what you think are your free thoughts, your decisions to listen to what we're saying and make a decision. If you think those are free, it's an illusion. As Sam Harris, the atheist, says, you don't have that kind of freedom. You think you have it, but it's not really true.
Yeah, but I do have it.
You do have it.
And even more than that, I have eternity in my heart.
Yes, and that changes everything.
And I have the ability to think that.
That's right.
To perceive that. That, for me, is there is only a divine explanation for that.
Yeah, if you think your conscious life is an illusion, what are you using to think it's an illusion? You're using your conscious. You're stuck with this circular notion. You're using consciousness to perceive an illusion of consciousness. There's the problem. And so we're stuck with consciousness, and the fact that we can make an argument is perhaps the best argument for the existence of God.
Good argument, counselor. You've convinced the jury. If you want to investigate the evidence for a divinely created universe, this book is a great place to start. It's called God's Crime Scene, and it's available wherever books are sold. Jim, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate you.
We'll be back with more of the 700 Club Interactive right after this.